"Mayday, mayday, we've lost an engine, we're coming back," crackled through the radio waves on that fateful spring morning of May 25, 1979, as American Airlines Flight 191 fought desperately against the forces of physics that would ultimately claim 273 innocent souls in what became the deadliest aviation disaster in United States history. The gleaming McDonnell Douglas DC-10, tail number N110AA, had begun what should have been a routine Friday afternoon departure from Chicago O'Hare International Airport, bound for Los Angeles International Airport, carrying families excited for Memorial Day weekend getaways, business travelers completing another week of commerce, and crew members who had performed this very route countless times before, with unwavering confidence in their aircraft and their skills. Captain Walter Lux, a seasoned aviator with over 22,000 flight hours and an impeccable safety record spanning decades of commercial aviation, occupied the left seat alongside First Officer James Dillard, whose 9,275 hours of experience had prepared him for virtually every scenario except the one that was about to unfold in the most horrific fashion imaginable. Flight engineer Alfred Udovich rounded out the cockpit crew, his technical expertise and 15,963 hours of flight time making him the eyes and ears of the aircraft's complex systems that would soon fail in ways that defied every safety protocol and emergency procedure ever written. The morning had dawned clear and bright over the sprawling metropolis of Chicago, with light winds and perfect visibility stretching across the flat Illinois landscape toward the horizon, where the Great Lakes met the endless expanse of the American Midwest. Temperature readings showed a pleasant 59 degrees Fahrenheit with winds from the northwest at a gentle 14 knots, creating ideal conditions for flight operations that should have made this departure as routine as the thousands that preceded it from one of America's busiest aviation hubs. Passengers settled into their seats with the casual confidence that comes from routine air travel, many of them frequent flyers who had made this transcontinental journey numerous times without giving a second thought to the engineering marvel that would lift them 6 miles above the earth at speeds approaching 600 miles per hour. Among the 258 passengers were families with excited children pressed against windows, watching ground crews prepare their aircraft for flight, business executives reviewing presentations for Monday morning meetings in Los Angeles, and elderly couples embarking on vacation adventures they had planned for months with the kind of anticipation that makes air travel one of life's great enablers of human dreams and connections. The DC-10 represented the pinnacle of 1970s aviation technology, a wide-body trijet designed to carry hundreds of passengers across vast distances with unprecedented efficiency and comfort, its 3 Pratt & Whitney CF6 engines capable of producing enough thrust to launch the 400,000-pound aircraft into the sky with remarkable grace and power. American Airlines had invested heavily in this fleet, viewing the DC-10 as the future of long-haul domestic aviation, and their maintenance crews took immense pride in keeping these sophisticated machines in peak operating condition through rigorous inspection schedules and meticulous attention to every bolt, wire, and component that made flight possible. The aircraft that would become Flight 191 had been delivered to American Airlines in February 1972, accumulating over 20,000 flight hours and nearly 3,000 takeoff and landing cycles in its 7 years of faithful service, during which it had carried hundreds of thousands of passengers safely across the skies of North America without a single significant incident or mechanical failure that would have suggested the catastrophic vulnerability that lay hidden within its complex systems. The flight attendant crew, led by Chief Flight Attendant Judy Davidson, represented years of combined experience in managing passenger safety and comfort during both routine flights and emergency situations. Their training encompassing everything from medical emergencies to evacuation procedures to the kind of customer service that made American Airlines one of the most respected carriers in the industry. Flight attendants: Vicki Chavis, Catherine Hybert, Anthony Lackey, Tracy Marsh, Elizabeth Norvell, Philip Vollins, and Dorothy Warnack had each chosen aviation as their career because they loved the combination of travel, service, and the unique camaraderie that develops among crew members who work together in the confined space of an aircraft cabin while caring for the needs of passengers from all walks of life. None of them could have imagined that this routine Friday afternoon flight would become their final act of service, performed with the same dedication and professionalism that had defined their careers even as their world collapsed around them in ways that defied every scenario in their extensive emergency training. As Flight 191 pushed back from Gate K5 at O'Hare, the familiar sounds of jet engines spooling up and ground equipment moving about created the symphony of commercial aviation that had become the soundtrack of modern America's mobility revolution. The aircraft taxied slowly through the maze of runways and taxiways that made O'Hare one of the world's busiest airports, its pilots following the precise instructions of air traffic controllers, who orchestrated the complex dance of hundreds of aircraft movements throughout each busy day. Ground personnel waved goodbye from their positions around the gate area, many of them having worked with this particular crew numerous times and considering them friends as well as professional colleagues in the vast network of people who make commercial aviation possible. Captain Lux advanced the throttles as the heavy jet lined up on runway 32. Right, the same runway where countless flights had safely departed before them, and the three massive engines began to generate the tremendous forces necessary to overcome gravity and transform 273 human beings from earthbound travelers into airborne passengers hurtling through the atmosphere at impossible speeds. The takeoff roll proceeded normally for the first critical seconds, with airspeed indicators climbing steadily through the predetermined rotation speed as the pilots monitored engine parameters, control surface responses, and the myriad of instruments that told the story of their aircraft's performance in real time. Air traffic controllers in the tower watched Flight 191's progress with routine interest, noting the aircraft's position and preparing to hand off communication to departure control as the DC-10 climbed away from O'Hare toward its initial assigned altitude. The cockpit voice recorder captured the normal conversation between crew members as they performed their assigned duties during the takeoff phase, their voices reflecting the calm professionalism of aviators who had performed these same procedures thousands of times throughout their careers without any reason to expect that this departure would be different from all the others. But at precisely 2:59 p.m., Central Daylight Time, as Flight 191 reached the critical V1 decision speed of 153 knots, and committed to becoming airborne, the unthinkable happened in a catastrophic sequence that would unfold over the next 31 terrifying seconds. The left engine, that massive CF6 power plant that had been manufactured with exacting precision and maintained according to the strictest federal aviation regulations, suddenly and violently separated from the wing in an explosive failure that sent shockwaves through the aviation industry and forever changed how engineers and pilots understood the delicate relationship between power, structure, and aerodynamic stability. The 18,500-pound engine assembly tore away from its mounting pylon with such tremendous force that it took critical hydraulic lines, electrical systems, and flight control connections with it, instantly transforming the DC-10 from a perfectly controllable aircraft into an aerodynamic nightmare that would challenge every ounce of skill and experience that Captain Lux and his crew possessed. The sound of the engine separation was unlike anything the crew had ever experienced or trained for, a combination of metal tearing, hydraulic systems failing, and electrical circuits shorting out that created a cacophony of mechanical destruction that penetrated every corner of the aircraft. Witnesses on the ground watched in absolute horror as the massive engine tumbled end over end through the air before crashing into a nearby hangar, its impact creating a secondary explosion that added to the surreal nightmare unfolding above the suburban landscape northwest of Chicago. The wounded DC-10 struggled to climb, with only 2 remaining engines and compromised flight controls that were already beginning to fail in ways that no simulator had ever prepared the crew to handle. The aircraft's response to pilot inputs becoming increasingly erratic as critical systems lost power and hydraulic pressure throughout the complex network of components that made controlled flight possible. The immediate aftermath of the engine separation created a cascade of system failures that transformed the cockpit from a controlled environment of routine procedures into a chaos of warning lights, alarm bells, and instrument readings that told an increasingly desperate story. The loss of the left engine's hydraulic systems meant that critical flight control surfaces were no longer responding to pilot inputs with their normal precision and authority, while the asymmetric thrust from the 2 remaining engines was creating a rolling moment that required constant correction to prevent the aircraft from entering an unrecoverable spiral. Captain Lux fought to maintain control as the DC-10 climbed sluggishly to approximately 325 feet above the ground. But the laws of physics and aerodynamics were already writing the tragic conclusion to this story as the damaged wing began to lose lift in a phenomenon that would later be identified as the primary cause of this unprecedented disaster. The leading-edge slats on the left wing, designed to improve airflow and maintain lift at low speeds, had lost their hydraulic power when the engine tore away, and they began to retract automatically as the aircraft climbed, creating a critical asymmetry in lift distribution that no amount of pilot skill could overcome. This insidious failure mode had never been fully understood or analyzed by McDonnell Douglas engineers, who had focused their attention on more obvious failure scenarios, without considering the possibility that an engine separation could create a situation where the aircraft's own safety systems would contribute to its destruction. The retracting slats caused the left wing to stall at a much lower angle of attack than the right wing, creating a rolling moment that increased exponentially as the aircraft climbed, and its airspeed decreased toward the minimum speed required to maintain controlled flight. Air traffic controllers in the O'Hare Tower watched with growing alarm as Flight 191's radar signature showed the aircraft beginning to deviate from its assigned departure path, the transponder signal indicating an altitude that seemed impossibly low for an aircraft that should have been climbing steadily toward its initial cruising altitude. The crew's last radio transmission, that haunting, "Mayday, Mayday, we've lost an engine, we're coming back," would become forever etched in the annals of aviation history as a testament to the professionalism and dedication of airline pilots who continue to fight for their passengers' lives even when facing impossible circumstances. But even as Captain Lux attempted to return to O'Hare for an emergency landing, the aerodynamic forces acting on his crippled aircraft were already beyond the limits of human control, the asymmetric lift distribution causing the DC-10 to begin a slow but inexorable roll to the left that would accelerate into the final moments of this tragedy. The passengers aboard Flight 191 experienced those terrifying seconds with a mixture of confusion, fear, and the kind of helpless vulnerability that comes from being completely dependent on the skill of others in a situation beyond their understanding or control. Many had felt the violent shudder that ran through the aircraft when the engine separated, followed by the unnatural sounds of an airplane struggling against forces it was never designed to withstand. But few could have comprehended the magnitude of the crisis unfolding around them as their pilots fought desperately to save their lives. The sudden loss of normal engine noise from the left side of the aircraft, replaced by the screaming of metal and the whistling of air through damaged structures, created an atmosphere of growing panic as passengers realized that something catastrophic had occurred to their aircraft. Flight attendants, trained to remain calm and professional in even the most challenging circumstances, found themselves facing a situation that exceeded every emergency scenario in their extensive training as the aircraft's unusual attitude and the sounds of struggling engines created an atmosphere of barely controlled panic throughout the passenger cabin. Some passengers later reported seeing the separated engine through their windows, a sight so surreal and terrifying that many initially assumed they were hallucinating or experiencing some kind of nightmare from which they would soon wake up safe and sound on the ground. Others described the sensation of the aircraft rolling and diving in ways that defied their understanding of how commercial airliners were supposed to behave, the forces of gravity and momentum pressing them against their seats in patterns that spoke of impending disaster even to those with no aviation knowledge or experience. Children cried for their parents while adults struggled to comprehend the reality of their situation, some praying silently, while others called out to loved ones in what they instinctively understood might be their final moments together. The flight attendants moved through the cabin with extraordinary courage and professionalism, attempting to calm passengers and prepare them for a possible emergency landing, even as they themselves struggled with the knowledge that their aircraft was behaving in ways that suggested a far more serious crisis than a routine engine failure. Their training had prepared them to deal with single engine failures, which were considered serious but manageable emergencies that pilots regularly practiced in simulators, and that airlines had procedures to handle with reasonable confidence in a successful outcome. As Flight 191 continued its tortured climb to approximately 400 feet above the suburban landscape northwest of O'Hare, the aerodynamic stall that had been developing on the left wing finally reached its critical point, causing a complete loss of lift that sent the massive aircraft into an unrecoverable left roll and dive. The physics of flight, those immutable laws that had been harnessed to make human flight possible, now became the instruments of destruction as the DC-10's damaged wing could no longer generate sufficient lift to keep 273 souls aloft. Captain Lux and First Officer Dillard pulled back on their control yokes with every ounce of strength they possessed, trying desperately to raise the nose and arrest the developing dive. But the aircraft's flight control systems had been so severely compromised by the engine separation that their inputs were largely ineffective against the powerful forces now dominating the flight path. The cockpit voice recorder captured the crew's final moments as they worked together with the kind of professional teamwork that had characterized their entire careers. Each pilot contributing his expertise and experience to the impossible task of regaining control of an aircraft that had exceeded the boundaries of recoverable flight. Their voices remained calm and focused, even as their instruments told the story of an aircraft in an unrecoverable dive, a testament to the training and character that defines the aviation profession, even in its most challenging moments. Flight engineer Udovich called out critical information about engine parameters and system status, while the two pilots fought the controls, each crew member performing his assigned duties, even as they all understood that their aircraft was beyond the realm of human control. The DC-10 rolled past 90 degrees of bank angle, its nose dropping toward the Earth as gravity and aerodynamics combined to accelerate the massive aircraft toward an inevitable collision with the ground below. The two remaining engines continued to operate at maximum power, as the crew desperately tried to climb away from the ground, but the laws of physics dictated that an aircraft in such a steep bank angle and high angle of attack could not generate sufficient lift to overcome the forces pulling it toward the Earth. The stall warning systems activated continuously as the aircraft exceeded every parameter for controlled flight, but there was no recovery procedure that could address the unique combination of failures that had befallen Flight 191 in those final seconds of its existence. The final moments of Flight 191 unfolded with the terrible inevitability of a Greek tragedy. As the aircraft dove toward a mobile home park and open field in the town of Des Plaines, Illinois, its two remaining engines screaming at maximum power in a futile attempt to generate enough thrust to overcome the aerodynamic disaster that had befallen this once proud machine. Residents on the ground heard the distinctive whine of jet engines under extreme stress, a sound that aviation professionals recognize as the mechanical equivalent of a scream of agony, as the DC-10 plummeted from 400 feet altitude in a steep left bank that placed it completely beyond the realm of controllable flight. Emergency services throughout the Chicago area began responding to reports of an aircraft in distress, but the speed with which events unfolded meant that rescue efforts could only focus on the aftermath, rather than any possibility of preventing the impending disaster. The impact occurred at 3:04 p.m., exactly 31 seconds after the engine separation, as Flight 191 struck the Earth at a nearly inverted attitude and a speed of approximately 200 miles per hour. The tremendous kinetic energy of the 400,000-pound aircraft, creating a fireball that could be seen for miles across the Chicago metropolitan area. The crash site became a scene of devastation that challenged the capabilities of every emergency responder who arrived to deal with the aftermath of this unprecedented disaster. The intense heat of burning jet fuel and wreckage making rescue efforts extremely difficult and dangerous for the firefighters and paramedics who risked their lives attempting to save anyone who might have survived the impact. The explosion and fire could be seen from the control tower at O'Hare, where air traffic controllers who had been tracking Flight 191's final moments watched in horror as the radar target disappeared and emergency vehicles began racing toward the crash site. The crash of American Airlines Flight 191 sent shockwaves through the aviation industry and the traveling public that reverberated for years afterward, fundamentally changing how engineers, pilots, regulators, and airlines approach the critical relationship between aircraft design, maintenance procedures, and emergency response protocols. News of the disaster spread rapidly through television and radio broadcasts that interrupted regular programming to report the worst aviation accident in United States history. Images of the burning wreckage and emergency response efforts serving as stark reminders of the risks inherent in air travel and the devastating consequences when complex systems fail in unexpected ways. Airlines around the world immediately began reviewing their DC-10 maintenance procedures and flight operations, while aviation authorities launched investigations that would ultimately reshape the entire industry's approach to safety management and risk assessment. The National Transportation Safety Board's investigation revealed that the engine separation had been caused by maintenance procedures that inadvertently damaged the engine pylon during routine maintenance, creating a crack that propagated over multiple flight cycles until it finally failed catastrophically during the takeoff roll. The specific procedure that led to this failure involved the use of a forklift to remove and install the engine and pylon assembly as a single unit, rather than removing them separately as recommended by the manufacturer, a shortcut that American Airlines had adopted to reduce maintenance time and costs without fully understanding the stress concentrations it created in the pylon structure. More significantly, the investigation discovered that the loss of the left engine had caused the automatic retraction of the wing's leading edge slats, creating an asymmetric stall condition that made the aircraft uncontrollable at low altitude and airspeed, a design characteristic that had never been fully understood or addressed in pilot training programs. The tragedy led to immediate changes in DC-10 maintenance procedures and the temporary grounding of the entire worldwide fleet, while engineers and safety experts worked to understand and address the systemic issues that had contributed to this disaster. The Federal Aviation Administration issued an emergency airworthiness directive that prohibited the continued operation of all DC-10 aircraft until airlines could demonstrate that their maintenance procedures did not create the conditions that had led to the Flight 191 accident, marking the first time in aviation history that an entire aircraft type had been grounded based on a single accident investigation. Airlines were forced to completely revise their engine maintenance protocols, eliminating the use of forklifts to remove and install engines in favor of more precise and controlled methods that reduced the risk of structural damage to critical components. Changes that required significant investments in new equipment and retraining of maintenance personnel throughout the industry. Pilot training programs were enhanced to include scenarios involving multiple system failures and asymmetric flight conditions, though the specific circumstances of Flight 191's final moments remained largely unrecoverable, even with improved training and procedures. The development of new simulation technologies allowed pilots to experience scenarios that had previously been considered too dangerous or impractical to practice in actual aircraft, providing crews with exposure to emergency situations that could help them respond more effectively to unexpected failures and system malfunctions. Flight training organizations around the world began incorporating lessons learned from Flight 191 into their curricula, ensuring that future generations of pilots would be better prepared to handle the kind of complex emergency that had overwhelmed even experienced crews in the past. The Federal Aviation Administration implemented new regulations requiring enhanced redundancy in critical flight systems and improved warning systems to alert crews to developing emergencies before they reached the point of no return. Aircraft manufacturers were required to conduct more comprehensive failure mode and effects analyses that considered not just individual component failures, but also the cascading effects that could result when multiple systems were compromised simultaneously. The certification process for new aircraft designs was expanded to include more rigorous testing of emergency scenarios and failure conditions, ensuring that future aircraft would be better able to handle the kind of catastrophic failures that had made Flight 191 uncontrollable. Perhaps most importantly, the crash of Flight 191 served as a stark reminder that aviation safety is not a destination, but a continuous journey of improvement, learning, and adaptation in the face of new challenges and unforeseen circumstances. The aviation industry's response to this tragedy exemplified the culture of safety that has made commercial flying the safest form of transportation in human history, with manufacturers, airlines, regulators, and safety organizations working together to understand every aspect of the accident and implement changes that would prevent similar occurrences in the future. The 273 people who perished that spring afternoon in 1979 did not die in vain if their sacrifice led to improvements that prevented similar tragedies from occurring in the future. And indeed, the lessons learned from this disaster have contributed to the remarkable safety record that commercial aviation has achieved in the decades since. Every commercial pilot who trains for engine failures during takeoff, every maintenance technician who follows precise procedures for engine removal and installation, and every engineer who designs redundant safety systems into modern aircraft carries forward the legacy of Flight 191 and the commitment to ensuring that such a tragedy never occurs again. The procedural changes, technological improvements, and cultural shifts that resulted from this accident have saved countless lives over the ensuing decades, demonstrating how the aviation industry's commitment to learning from its mistakes has transformed air travel from a relatively risky endeavor in its early days to the remarkably safe transportation system that millions of people rely on today. The families and friends of those lost aboard Flight 191 faced the impossible task of rebuilding their lives in the aftermath of a tragedy that defied comprehension and challenged every assumption about the safety of commercial air travel. Many became advocates for aviation safety improvements, channeling their grief into productive efforts to prevent other families from experiencing similar losses, while others simply tried to find meaning and peace in the face of an event that seemed to offer neither. Support groups formed among the survivors and family members, creating networks of mutual aid and understanding that helped individuals cope with trauma that extended far beyond the immediate aftermath of the accident itself. The crew of Flight 191, Captain Lux, First Officer Dillard, and Flight Engineer Udovich, along with their fellow flight attendants, died as they had lived their professional lives, fighting to protect their passengers until the very end, their final actions serving as a testament to the dedication and professionalism that defines the aviation industry even in its darkest moments. Memorials and tributes to the crew and passengers have been established at various locations, ensuring that their memory and the lessons of their tragedy continue to inspire safety improvements and professional excellence throughout the aviation community. Today, as we reflect on the lessons learned from American Airlines Flight 191, we can take some measure of comfort in knowing that the aviation industry's response to this tragedy has made commercial flying safer for millions of passengers who trust their lives to the skill of pilots, the expertise of mechanics, and the integrity of aircraft systems every single day. The advanced warning systems, improved maintenance procedures, enhanced pilot training programs, and redundant safety systems that characterize modern commercial aviation all trace their lineage back to disasters like Flight 191 and the determination of safety professionals to ensure that every lesson is learned, every improvement is implemented, and every possible safeguard is put in place to protect human life. Modern aircraft incorporate multiple layers of redundancy and safety systems that would have prevented the kind of catastrophic failure mode that doomed Flight 191, while maintenance procedures have been refined to eliminate the human factors and procedural shortcuts that contributed to this disaster. If you found this video informative and want to continue learning about aviation safety and the incredible stories of courage and dedication that define commercial flying, please consider subscribing to our channel and sharing this content with others who appreciate the remarkable journey that has made air travel the safest form of transportation in human history, because every view, every subscription, and every share helps us continue telling these important stories that honor the memory of those we've lost while celebrating the ongoing commitment to safety that protects us all when we take to the skies.